Hi, I'm Khadiba Devine, anchor at 12 News, and we're at a unique point in Arizona's history. We thought it was time for us to look at how we got here and have a conversation about where we're headed. These conversations are real, they're emotional, and they're from the heart. You'll hear from community leaders, professionals, mothers, and your own neighbors. You'll hear from me and some of my colleagues, but this isn't about us. It's about the community that we live in and love. Thank you for watching, and we hope that what you're about to see makes you think.
Like Thomas Jefferson said, race and racism is like trying to hold a wolf by the ears, and eventually it's going to get away from you. Like Thomas Jefferson said, race and racism is like trying to hold a wolf by the ears, and eventually it's going to get away from you. And it's gotten away from us because we've never really addressed it. And folks say, well, what do you got to do? We've had a civil war.
My mother's mother came from Okmulgee, Oklahoma. And she came during a time when there were cotton that was growing here in Arizona, out in Peoria, which is Peoria now. But they came with a migration of blacks that came from the South to Arizona to pick cotton. And there was a whole camp of African Americans that were out in the Peoria, Avondale area, because that's where the crops were. So that's where they first came, and that's where they migrated from up into different areas in Phoenix.
Former enslaved people migrated out here in large part because they were recruited by local citrus growers and cotton growers, because these growers knew that African Americans knew how to cultivate those crops and or had worked in farming. And so they lured us here, literally with advertisements in the South. Mr. Farley needs 100 Negro cotton pickers on his farm. That's a direct quote from the sign, right, that actually existed. And they came here because those signs and those recruiters also indicated that they would enjoy a freer life out here. So they bought the propaganda, so to speak. And they came out here, and to a certain degree, some of that was true. Racial relations were more fluid here. There weren't as many African Americans, and as a consequence, they weren't scaring the daylights out of most white people.
The cotton pickers bus stopped right on the corner of my street at 11th Street in Washington. And it would come and pick people up in the morning. And I used to wish I could get on that bus rather than go to St. Mary's Grammar School.
There's this narrative of Arizona as being this beautiful desert oasis, this valley of the sun, a place where anybody can come, and if they just work hard and play by the rules, they can be successful. They can enjoy the American dream, right? Just pull themselves up by their bootstraps. It never talks about the people who didn't have any boots. It never talks about the folks who came along with scissors and cut the straps off. It never talks about any of that. But that's the reality. I would argue that the Klan didn't infiltrate the culture here. They had been inextricably linked to it from the beginning. I do know that the Klan on Sundays would walk into black churches, silence everything without them speaking, just by virtue of them descending upon the building with their robes and hoods on, and just put a few coins into the plate, and then they would turn around and leave. And I've had students ask me, well, why would they do that? And I said, they're just sending a message. We're here. Be careful, and we're watching you. And that's precisely what happened. The Klan was represented very well among our business leaders in this community. They didn't need to lynch people or burn people out. They could reign supreme, even be brought up on charges not connected to their being in the Klan, but what's revealed in the process is that they are members of the Klan. They are white supremacists. They're wielding their financial authority and building a city and a state predicated on white supremacy.
So I lived at the northernmost edge of the redlining off of 11th Street, just about a couple blocks south of Van Buren. We really did not venture out into those other areas because we knew it wasn't safe for us.
And we owned a home there on 15th Avenue and Sonora, which of course back in the day was almost unheard of for blacks owning homes, but it was a development that was built for black people. So predominantly the area was black. The school that I went to, Mary McLeod Bethune School, from kindergarten to 8th grade, was totally an African American school. There were a few Hispanics there who had moved into the neighborhood, but basically I grew up in a segregated school. I don't think it was there by design, but that's what happened because that's all who lived in the community. And the most experiences that we had is from Phoenix Union High School. We would walk downtown to catch the bus to go home. And there was a Woolworth store right on the corner. And it was the longest time that we didn't realize that we couldn't eat at the lunch counter at that time. But it wasn't important to us, so we had already ate lunch at school, so we weren't thinking about that, but they did later on have a protest and a sit-in.
Systemic racism that is still very much present in housing, healthcare, economic development, criminal justice reform, education. It's all over the place. In the fifth largest city in the country and the fourth largest county in the country. It's infected.
So I remember distinctly one day I was washing my car, and I was washing in the driveway on the property, and an officer pulls up and she says, I have a complaint, or at first it was a guy, he said, I have a complaint of loud Mexican music is what he said. I am half Latino, but I don't speak Spanish or listen to the Latino music. So he's like, but I don't hear anything from here anyway, so you're fine. He leaves. I'm still washing my car. I finish up 10 minutes later. Another officer shows up, this time it's a female, and then she proceeds to get out of her vehicle, come onto the property and confront me and tell, that she has these complaints and that I need to stop doing this and that. And I'm like, I'm not doing anything but washing my car on my property. Like, what more do you want from me?
There is no hospital south of the Maricopa Freeway. So if somebody has a stroke or a heart attack in South Phoenix, they have to go north of the freeway to get to Maricopa Medical Center or Banner University, what it's called now, and seconds determine if you live or not. Just in a meeting with the superintendent of the Roosevelt Elementary School District, why is our public education system set up so that suburban school districts look like small community colleges, and inner city school districts have to fight to get new books every year, have to fight to keep the infrastructure up? Banks, redlining. Why are there more payday loan establishments in inner city communities, people of color? Because the banks will not loan people. So redlining is still very much existent.
Our literary greats had it. I mean, they put it on a silver platter. It's in these wonderful books of poetry and literature. It's all there. We know, we read it. And we're like, wow, same thing, your aha moment. This was the same thing that you were talking about. 1940s, 1950s, 1930s, before then. It doesn't change. And so all I'm getting at is it's the same problem. So when you ask me the question of do I have any confidence or any hope in the institutions, it's got to be a demand. You have to dismantle them. The way that they exist, whether it's organizationally, whether it's policy-wise, it could be a number of ways. but you got to start from scratch. But nobody wants to do the work, maybe because it's tough work, maybe because it requires us to all look at ourselves, maybe because it's expensive financially in some cases, but it's got to happen. We will never be able to be the country we portray ourselves to be if we don't.
I was in the minority, so it was me against most everybody else. So it was like, I'm not even gonna bother trying to have these conversations, and I'm just gonna try to blend in best as I can.
You had two black people on a military base in a bar, a pub, or something of that nature, and they get into an argument. It happens. The argument spills outside. They're fighting. The MPs show up and just start knocking heads, right? They're not distinguishing who was actually in the fight, who wasn't. Quickly, the people who are involved in the fight sort of run. They flee. The word is that they're running into the black community. So as a consequence, the military, aided by the local police, then go into the black community. They leave the Papago Park area and go into the black, which isn't that far away, and just start rousting people. Just start attacking folks. Anyone who basically fits the description, right? Which we still hear now. Potting houses with 50 caliber weapons, shooting into homes where men, women, and children were, to round up two folks. And we weren't alone. This happened in cities all over the United States. But again, many people think that Arizona and Phoenix is immune and has been immune to those sorts of things. But it certainly happened. Yes, it started as a fight among black folks. But the people who were sworn to protect and serve them as a group didn't distinguish one person from another. They just became a group of black people that were being unruly and uppity and acting out of order and had to be reminded of where their place is.
I've gotten in quite a few police brutality cases as a criminal defense attorney where the defendant, who is the one who's truly the victim in the case, is being charged with aggravated assault or being charged with resisting arrest or something like that along those lines. And it's infuriating because you can see when it's a person of color, usually the outcome, the level of violence that's used is much higher.
And I was very aware of the hypocrisy within the Constitution. And I always, and it still happens, it's this thing that still happens to me mentally, where reading a law or reading what have you, I will hear all white people are created equal. All white people are endowed with inalienable rights.
Anger. 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 That's how I process it. And let me explain. There are no more words for it. It happens far too frequently in this country. And I think of each of those people as, wow, that could have been my family. Could have been my brother. Could have been my husband. Could have been my cousin. It's not right that as African Americans, we have to live in the greatest country on the planet and fear our own law enforcement that pledge to protect and to serve. But we realize they're protecting and serving maybe somebody else, but it doesn't always feel like it's us. I look at these stories over and over again and I'm like, what could the officer have been thinking? And it's always easy to armchair quarterback. But if they're running away from you and they don't have a deadly weapon, how are they a threat again? Because remember, my job is analysis. I gotta look at both sides. And sometimes I don't wanna look at both, I gotta look at both sides. And I'm just like, how do we get there? No, I'm not going for it. I'm not going for it. It's wrong. But it seems like There is a license to murder black men, women, and children, and it's okay.
You know, my son just turned 40, and he just recently told me about all the times that he was stopped by police. And I think he didn't tell me on purpose. And it started when he was 14 years old. And my son is not a big guy. He's muscular, but he's not tall. He's not menacing. He's very kind, very gentlemanly. But he just told me the other day, since he was 14 years old, he had been stopped 10 different times. And we live in Tempe. And he called me on the phone, and I could hear in his voice that he was very upset. And he says, Mom, he said, they stopped me for nothing. And they searched my car. And at that particular time, I told him how lucky, and of course I use the word blessed, that he was, that they didn't plant anything on him. And I remember when I got home that evening and my son came to me, they took the license plate off of his car and they took his driver's license from him. And the humiliation that my son felt that day, I felt it as well. And he hugged me so tight and cried. And to see a grown man cry like that, but that was one of the times when a lot of things became real for me.
That talk starts pretty early. The talk is ingrained in them. My perspective is a little different because I have 2 girls. I don't have boys. If I have boys, I'm sure it would be a lot different. I know there's a little gender bias, but I'm just being real. And the reality is, this is how you conduct yourself. This is what you do. Always remember, these are the fears that white America has about you. So you have to do what your mom does basically on a daily basis, is you got to process in your brain a way to manage the situation so you don't come across as saying or doing something that will be interpreted as a threat. So the talk is, don't say very much. Find out what they want, give them what they want. If it involves law enforcement and they take you in, ask to speak to an attorney, which is me. There's nothing more for you to say. I got it from there. When you encounter situations, I've always told my children, you have a voice, use it, but just be mindful of how it's going to be perceived. Because I don't want my kids operating from a place that they can't say anything. I've always told them I don't advise them to say anything really to law enforcement except, why am I being stopped? But if it's any other situation other than that, they can use their voice. But again, why do I even have to teach my children to qualify and to analyze and to pull back on what they want to say? Why can't we be authentic? Authentic is celebrated everywhere else, but why not with us?
There was always that, people make it sound like it's a new thing to fear the police. Black people have always feared the police, and rightly so. And it's one of those things too that it's annoying to me when I, watch old movies or I hear someone say, well, if he wasn't guilty, he wouldn't run.
That talk, that racism exists. The talk that I have with my son, I have to tell him, son, because of systemic racism, you're already 3 paces behind those who don't look like you. For you to catch up, you have to be 3 and 4 times as smart for you even to be considered an equal. And he's afraid.
my son said, "Dad, why do they keep doing this to us just because of the color of our skin?" And I had to explain to him that racism is taught and caught, and that it has been, the reason it continues to go on is because people say, well, Jim Crow is dead, Jim Crow is dead, but his children and grandchildren are still alive, and they're still perpetuating those same prejudice against people of color.
El Rey Cafeteria, many people talk about, that protest happened in the midst of another protest. They were actually protesting Goldwater's downtown, and yes, the Goldwater. They were protesting that because Goldwater wouldn't hire black people at the time, and they were protesting Woolworth down the street and a couple other businesses. And some of the activists, true story, were hungry, and they knew that El Rey did not serve black folks. And they did not serve Mexicans who identified as mestizo, which most people of Mexican descent are. There's a protest outside. People are marching by. Bill Dickey, who's the sister of Eleanor Ragsdale and the brother-in-law of Lincoln Ragsdale, basically says, I'm hungry. Bill Dickey was really fair, sandy blonde, brownish hair, light sort of green eyes. And so he just walks up, he goes in and sits down and orders, and they come out and they start to serve him. And as he's eating, protesters start coming by the window, and they're going by the window and they're looking and they're going, hey, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? We're in a protest. You're not doing protests in places like this. You're there eating. And he's like, I'm hungry. And one of the servers comes out and sees all of this happening. And they look at the people outside, and they look at Bill, and they look at the people outside, and look at Bill again. They said, are you black? And he said, well, yes, I am, and this is a delicious meal. And then, of course, they threw him out.
I mean, we tried to visit movies. We shopped downtown. And once again, that's why I included the poem, Downtown Phoenix, 1959, because it very much captures that experience of having the white people not see you and wait on all the other white people and then take your money like they're angry they have to do it. And that still happens, by the way. And I have a different reaction to it now, but it still happens.
I go through the security checkpoint for attorneys at the courthouse. I'm told I need to go on the main line. No, I'm an attorney. I go through the attorney line. And then somebody had to say, oh, no, I know her. One security, I know her. Why did that even have to happen? Why do I have to be vouched for? Because the people in front of me weren't vouched for. Why do I need to be vouched for? It happens regularly. I can stand in a place waiting in line to be served. Look right past me. It's like I'm the next person. Like, as tall as I am, I'm 5'10". You missed me? Really? It happens. And some people would say, well, they just didn't see you. But it happens enough where it's like, you're right. They don't see me. And not just, they just don't see me physically. They don't see me. They just don't see me. I'm like invisible. It's not a good place, because that's the last thing any human being wants, is to not be seen. Could you imagine walking into this room and everybody just continued doing what they were doing and they never acknowledged you? And you could say, well, maybe everybody's busy today. And then it happens the next day and maybe a couple days later. And then at some point you're just like, I'm really getting pissed off about this. That's what it feels like.
You know, I have to say I probably had a greater awareness of civil rights conflicts, but they were in other parts of the country. And as a media person, you know how narrow that lens can be. And if you think about who was controlling the media here, but we spent our summers in California, and my view of the world got much broader. I would hear music that I didn't hear here. In 1963, I was crazy about the Beatles, but now I look back and it's like, I don't want anything to do with that. That wasn't even for me. You know, that was for those other kids. The Beach Boys, they weren't for me. Get out of here. So I was very aware of my friends or my schoolmates whose families were in the John Birch Society. Some of the things that they would say. Very often you would feel threatened.
This is a problem that not only we've faced for hundreds of years, but that we're still facing today in 2020.
And so after this routine stopped, some of the brothers started questioning aggressively while they were being stopped. They were accused of resisting arrest. People start pouring out of their houses, yelling at the police. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? Watts riots erupted the same way. And police arrest the guy. People start throwing things at the police car. More police are called to come out. And they start rounding people up. People start calling each other. Word of mouth spreads like this. The police are just running through the neighborhood. You know, they got so-and-so. People are grabbing their weapons, particularly young people. They're taken to the streets. The police response to resistance to police is to send more police. They send more police. Next thing you know, there's just fights in the street.
The steam has finally come out of the pot. That it's been on the stove long enough now, and there are some people who are the steam.
It's been boiling for a long time, but I believe the public, quote, execution, unquote, of Mr. George Floyd caused us to have national trauma. Millions, if not hundreds of millions of people saw a public execution. We don't normally see that. And I believe that some of the reaction is trying to work through our national trauma, because we saw racism at its worst when the white police officer nonchalantly kept his knee on a man who said, "I can't breathe" several times, and even called on his deceased mother. As a pastor, I've been around people as they died. And it's not uncommon for people to call their deceased loved one by name when they're dying. They'll call people who've been dead for years. The fact that he called his mother, he knew he was dying.
Keeping the issue in the forefront, continuing to express that is unacceptable for our Black men, children, and women being killed in the street is just not acceptable. And we're not going to sit by silently, and we are not going to just mumble in our own household. We are going to cry out from the highest mountains, and we're going to start holding corporations accountable, and we are going to work collectively as a group to say enough is enough. And so whether that is a piece of legislation, whether that is making sure that we are all connected in with our political leaders, whatever it takes, that's what is going to happen. Because it's just, it's not, and I think when the way that my brain looked at this is that we dealt with this with Rodney King, right? And we focus on Rodney King, or at least I do, as a starting point, because that's when video. So my point is, that's when we have a completely objective record of what happened. That was Rodney King. And so you start from that premise and you work all the way forward. People still getting gunned down. You have George Floyd, the obvious one, that has sort of, blew the tea kettle. And then after that, Rashad Brooks, and there's many others that just are not making it to front page news.
As a person of faith, a kairos moment, K-A-I-R-O-S. Kairos is the New Testament Greek word used in Mark 1:15, was that, and the time for the fulfillment of the kingdom of God was at hand. And kairos means that God is interrupting and intervening our regular schedules to get our attention to make a change. So reckoning, yes, as a person of faith, it's a kairos moment that we can either waste or we will take advantage of it. God forbid that we waste it.
There's this fallacy in American history that we have moved forward in this nation because critical white leadership just woke up one morning and did the right thing. It's just, I would love for that to be the narrative, but things have changed because people have literally taken to the streets.
I'm very delighted to say something I've been wanting to say in Arizona for 6 years now. Free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. It was a monumental moment for all we went through to fight for. I mean, back in the 70s and 80s, when the whole idea of a Martin Luther King holiday was introduced in the legislature here in Arizona, most white people in Arizona thought it was a black holiday. And since at that time Arizona only had about 3% African American, why do we need to have a holiday? Y'all ain't even got 5% here. And so for 6.5 years from when it was declared by the executive order in this church, in this pulpit, in this sanctuary, by Governor Bruce Babbitt, he signed it in the pulpit of this church, until we finally won it. We had to re-educate Arizona that the King holiday is as much an American holiday as President Abraham Lincoln's birthday, as George Washington's birthday. And what George Washington was in the 18th century to America, led the revolution. What Lincoln was in the 19th century, Emancipation Proclamation, Civil War. Martin Luther King was to America in the 20th century in delegalizing racism in the structure of our everyday life. Oh, we fought very hard. We fought against great odds. We fought against great odds. It took blood, sweat, and tears. This state lost hundreds of millions of dollars because they would not honor a holiday signed into law by President Ronald Reagan, a Republican president, in 1986, and a Republican-controlled state who lost $500 million almost to honor him. The opponent was systemic racism. The same opponent we have now.
The system is not broken. The system is designed.
When Africans were kidnapped, they became commodities. It still divides us. Human beings as commodities. And I don't care if they're Africans, I don't care if they're Nicaraguans, I don't care if they're whatever they are, human beings as commodities. Stigma divides us. Every black person in this country has the stigma of being black.
How can you say that you're not certain that systemic racism exists when in Maricopa County alone, it is proven that black men are 3 times more likely to be pulled over by the police, and we're 3 times more likely to get longer sentences than those who don't look like us. You cannot be the governor of the state, seeing that this is happening and you not see it for what it is. We first have to accept it, that it is a reality. And I think that's going to be hard work. for people to really see it. And I think a lot of them see it, but we don't want to recognize it because in the recognition of it, it brings about a certain level of responsibility. I can't fix what I don't know. And I think that a lot of them take the easy route to say, I don't realize it, because by me not realizing it, I'm not responsible for how to fix it.
When people are saying this is structural racism and racism is an epidemic, we're not like whistling Dixie, for lack of a better phrase. It's real. It's happening for many people. They're not living it, and so as a consequence, it's harder for them to see it. And that's why you see all of this stuff that's happening. It really is a very emotional way of saying, please see us.
You know, you hate to say, here we go again, but here we go again. And you would have liked, you want to think that that time has passed, but these instances that we see today, we realize that they haven't, that there is still hatred in people's heart. There's still animosity.
This movement is the young people are telling us older generations, you all failed. You messed this up. And I believe they're saying, not arrogantly, that we're going to try to fix this. And we're going to hold you accountable of fixing this mess that we were born into.
Hope and healing has to start with work. We as a nation have to be ready to put the work in. We as a nation need to hear, as painful as it may be, the stories I have, the stories many other people have that are far more egregious than mine. When they hear, be ready to make the changes. Listening to stories all day with no action is pointless, but really ready to make the changes. And I believe those changes have to start from the top down. So that's on a state level, on a national level, that's what we have to do, on a community level. And we almost have to police ourselves in that regard. Hey, are we doing our best? Maybe we could do a little bit better.
How do you try and understand most things? When you were working on your degrees, you invested your time, your energy. Things that you did not understand, you looked for help with. That's how you approach any problem. If you're a person of faith, you pray on it.
Now, what we can do is dismantle what has been built and truly rebuild again. And I think looking at the story, as we talk about Phoenix in particular, I'm always taken by the actual story of the Phoenix and how it rises from the ashes. But there has to be some ashes first in order for new birth to come about. And so that's what I think we're experiencing at this moment in time, is that yes, there is ashes that have come from fires of racism, fires of prejudice, but out of those fires is going to bring forth a great new Phoenix.
I want the world to look a lot different by the time I have kids. I don't want them to feel as though they have to tiptoe through society, or like what I had to do was blend in to sort of just not create any waves in school, things of that nature. I want them to grow up the same way white kids grow up. You just grow up, you're a kid, you have fun. And then as you gain more experiences, your mind changes, but you never have to worry about things like, oh, I'm outside playing with a water gun, will the police come up and kill me? Or, oh, I want to wear braids to school, is my principal going to pull me into the office and be like, you need to take the braids out of your head? I just want Black children to be able to grow up like in peace and not have to worry about the things that we have to worry about being Black.